Okay. Um, Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. And it's been really interesting so far. Um, Alistair, Justin, John, Gautier, Fred. I've managed to catch your sessions. I haven't caught all of them, but thanks so much, Mark and Simon, for putting this together. I think it's a hugely consequential topic for design, and it's really nice to see something finally happening in this space. And so yes, so I'm going to present some of my work. I don't know if some of it's like I presented before, so I hope I don't bore anyone, but I've got new stuff, some new things as well. And I really enjoyed doing the Miro the other day with John. So I've actually put all of these slides onto Miro. So if we have time, we could maybe do a bit of a mapping thing at the end, although I don't know if we're going to get there. If not, then, and if there's some interest, I might do another session with this amazing conference design process. We can like respond to where the interest is. So, but I just thought I'd sort of do a review of some of the major concepts that I've been working with in this area. Okay. And some of this, those who know me will be aware that this comes from, some of this will come from my book, Design Ecology Politics, published in 2018. And, but this is what I'm going to cover today. Okay, we'll start with an introduction and talk a bit about the political economy of design, this idea of Anthropocene design economies, looking towards different types of design economies, and what some like emergent work on post-pandemic design economies. Unfortunately, some of these areas are not very well developed, so I hope I don't, yeah, I can't really, I don't have that much to offer in some of these, the last few areas at least. Okay, and so in my abstract, I said that Anthropocene design economies currently reproduce unsustainable conditions with accelerating social and economic harms. Economic priorities should be shape so-called unintended consequences, both social and environmental, of various types of design, and the work of creating sustainable and socially just futures by design is predicated on redirecting design economies. Probably most people agree with that. I mean, but these are just all opinions. So how is it that we can sort of build up a more persuasive argument to help those that are not sort of necessarily naturally attracted to this kind of argument, and how can we build new design strategies as a and visions and priorities outside, emerging from this kind of position. So, and all this is sort of also, before I go on, it really speaks to why it is that sustainability is so hard, and sort of I'll give a bit of background to this. Is like how I got into this area in the first place is because when I finished my master's in 2005, I launched a design studio called Ecolabs, and I was trying to use design for environmental projects. And one of the things I found was just, it was very difficult to make this work. And I think that most people who try to work in an environmental space that's will also have a lot of these sort of problems with trying to make a living while doing the right thing by the environment. And so it became evident to me that it was just an uphill battle. And also when I wanted to do things that would have more of an impact, it was very difficult to convince clients to do things in a way that would be more ecologically impactful. And so I felt there was a real sort of dearth of theory and ways of describing what it is that we had to do. So that's why I went back and did my PhD in ecological theory and design. And eventually that led to sort of unpacking the economics of why it wasn't happening, why sustainability wasn't happening on scale. So that was my route to this area. Okay. Yeah, so that next. The political economy of design. Okay, so the political economy of design is quite a major theme in my book, Design Ecology Politics. And I want to draw on, I just want to point out two major theorists that I've been drawing on because it's not very well theorized in design theory. And I think I'm going to, one of my next papers is going to be on why it's not. But for the moment, I've been looking at into other disciplines to describe the political economy, and I get a lot of inspiration from media studies. In this book, The Political Economy of Communication, where political economy is described as the study of social relations, particularly power relations that mutually constitute the production, distribution, consumption of resources, including communication resources, and the study and control of survival and social life. So that is referring to the political economy of communication, which I see which is especially relevant for my type of design, which is communication design, but I think the same logic applies to other types of design. The other theorist who's written about political economy of design, more specifically, is the same author who came up with the concept of ecological literacy, which was one of the idea around which my PhD was developed. So David Orr, he wrote a chapter in this book, in this handbook, the Routledge Handbook, came out about in 2018, and he writes about that the problem is not in the particular techniques of design, which have become very sophisticated, but in the haphazard structures, economic, political, social, in which design occurs, which slows the efforts to take ecological design to the necessary scale. So the rules of the system permit only change at the margins. And then I've also written about it in my book, where I describe design as having a role in mediating social relations. But the important decisions are made about what is made or not made are made further up the chain of command by those who determine the production policies and construct the economic framework. So the political economy of design determines might be quite a harsh word right there, what is design and whose interests are served. Obviously we can determine for ourselves what we want to design, but what ends up getting mass produced is not just up to us as individuals. And so from this analysis, it might seem that and so this is sort of like where I think design is an especially exciting practice. And so from this analysis, it might seem that individual designers have little power, but Yet design is a field of practice that plays a powerful role in the reproducing of the dynamics of the system. And so there's latent power that is not being utilized due to remote controlling. Felix Geraghty, who's quite a major theorist of that I've referenced in my work as well, through utilized due to remote controlling through ideology embedded in design, amongst other places. The system would fall apart instantly if enough of us stop describing to norms that enable it. It is a subjective grip of the values of the dominant order that the designers reproduce. So on one hand, we have the political economy, which largely determines what it is that designers do within their design studios, because we're told that we have to come up with this particular design problem and answer it in such and such way for our clients. But then on the other hand, designers are constantly reproducing a particular type of social relations. And so like with our work. And so how is it that, you know, potentially if we weren't sort of so convinced that we were locked into the system, we could do other things. And so that's a tension. And so with this exclusive focus on profit making, profit making markets and using pricing mechanisms to determine the extraction and allocation of resources. This system undermines both social and ecological orders on which the market depends. It exploits and even destroys its own context. This is an essential contradiction in capitalism. With every failure caused by this contradiction, more authoritarian mechanisms are used to attempt to maintain the current social order and increase it in an increasingly tenuous situation. So basically, because this system is inherently destructive to the orders on which it depends, it's creating more authoritarian responses now. And so design straddles the borders of various systems, the economy, obviously, which is a physical and a socially constructed system, society, which is a biological and socially constructed system, and the ecological system, which is a biological and geophysical system that is now impacted by the societal and economic orders. The current economic system, capitalism, has been constructed to respond only to one signal, to profit. It has not been designed to take the other systems into account. And microeconomics is currently based on this denial of biophysical reality. I'm sure that I'm not an economist, so any economist in the room might deny this, but I'll just move forward and we can discuss later. Okay, so the design industry is situated in this interface between the profit-seeking market and emerging communities of practitioners who are progressively capable of designing sustainability into the system in theory, but unable to do so in practice. While many individual designers are increasingly concerned about our ecological context, they struggle to materialize social and environmental priorities within capitalism, predominantly oblivious to these issues. And it is for this reason that the design of the political economy of itself is the primary design problem. Redirected design must transform the system that determines what is designed. I mean, obviously, that's a high order. Calling on some pretty major reconstruction of the way that we understand, not just the way that we understand ourselves, but the structures that have been built around the way that our knowledge systems understand reality. And so David Orr theorized this in his previously mentioned chapter. The practice of ecological design must be applied to the larger systems of politics, laws, and economics to design social systems that work with, not against, economic natural processes. And so I wrote about this in my journal paper, Anthropocene Economics and Design. And so in this section, I'm just going to talk a bit about currently existing design economies that I've referred to here as Anthropocene design economies. And this is basically what we have everywhere, the design economies working according to the logic of capitalism and creating the conditions of the Anthropocene. I'm sure people here will be familiar with this. The idea of the Anthropocene as the geological epoch that we have created, humans have created due to the types of technologies that we have developed, and the way in which those have impacted the geological cycle and the environment around the Earth, and the fragilities that have been created, such as climate change and the breaking of other planetary boundaries. And so what I want to talk about the way in which we think about the epoch that we're in, because it's important to, there's been some important critiques of the Anthropocene concept, which will help us think more holistically about what design economies are doing. And so the main critique with the Anthropocene concept is that it theorizes humanity as an undifferentiated whole. So it's as if the anthropos, all of us humans, are all responsible for this destruction for the crossing of planetary boundaries. And the critique of the anthropos is Anthropocene is led by people, for the most part, by people who are pushing forward alternative positions, the most prominent of which is the capitalism concept. And so the Anthropocene is very much a concept that comes from the natural sciences. It's proposed by a geologist, and it's and other environmental sciences, and it's responding to the question, what is occurring? So it's a very pragmatic examination of an analysis of the Earth system's changes that are happening. But the problem with the Anthropocene concept is that it doesn't really respond. I mean, it has the wrong answer, or it sets up a particular type of framework that, like I've said earlier, by blaming all of the anthropos, it doesn't allow us to understand the specific mechanisms that are the reasons for these dramatic changes. And so the capitalism concept is being proposed by people like Jason Moore, and he describes it as a more helpful way of framing the current epoch, because it describes why this is all occurring. And so this is a term from the social sciences. It's a critical theory, and it's more helpful in it creates a basis for a response. And then on the bottom we have the third concept here, and this is the concept from the design community, and there's only a couple of us really pushing it forward, but it was originally I'll get to it in a minute, actually. We'll come back to it, but I'll just say it's more like a generative concept. It's what would we like to occur. And so the critique of the Anthropocene is fairly well established now. Donna Haraway has said the Anthropocene must be as short and as thin as possible. I mean, we're not going to get back to the pre-Anthropocene conditions, but the problem is the Anthropocene is problematic in its framework, and since we need to do quite serious changes in within social relations in order to get to somewhere that with more sustainable ways of relating to each other. This is the proposal, that we need to move past the Anthropocene into an alternative scene where we're not making the conceptual, we're not reproducing the conceptual problems and the types of the problems that you know, the types of industries that emerge from those problems. And so in 2015, I was at a conference in Toronto where Rachel Armstrong, she's a design prof in Newcastle, said there's no advantage to bringing the Anthropocene into the future. The mythos of the Anthropocene does not help us. We must reimagine the world to enable the Ecocene. And so that's where I picked up the subtitle for my book. And I've been running with the Ecocene since, and I've taken it into a space that's quite different from what Rachel Armstrong. She's the Ecocene that I've theorized is uniquely my theory at the moment. She's not on board as far as I know, but I still have to give her credit for for inspiring me with the concept. Although obviously it's not that unique. You put eco on front of anything, it's probably seems quite cheesy to a lot of people. But since I was working with ecological literacy, I went with Ecocene. It's very self-evident. So the Ecocene, as I've developed it, is well versed with the scientific analysis of the Anthropocene and the critical perspective of the Caplozine, has an ontology, epistemology, and ethic emerging from ecological thought and ecological literacy. It's intersectional feminist, linking Ecocene to other isms and types of oppression. It's dependent on the redirection of the political economy of design, and is developed with an expanded and regenerative and distributed design. And so I see these as all necessary elements of a new more ecologically viable way of living on the planet. So I'll just go through them briefly. The first is this sort of marriage of, or this bringing together of the scientific Anthropocene and the critical Caplozine concept. And so on here you have two slides that I've been showing to describe these ideas. So the first is the sort of scientific analysis. The second is it tries to capture a metaphor for the politics, the political economy of the Caplozine, which is you know, a monopoly board, which is driving this sort of these planetary boundaries, these breaching of the planetary boundaries. And then this idea of an ontology, epistemology, and ethic emerging from ecological thought and ecological literacy. And so this is kind of standard sustainability stuff where we have to flip the standard way of thinking about the economy and to really recognize it as situated inside of the social and the ecological. And that's something that's in Kate Rayworth's work as well. So we'll come to that in a minute. And so again, that's the sort of flipping of the orders, which is part of the sort of sustainability framework. And again, here's another way of visualizing it, the really fragile way that we currently have constructed our economic system, with the market on the top, and very the dominant thing, but like with a very this upside down triangle, where we have to flip that triangle. Okay, the third part of this is the intersectional feminist feminism, and I've been using this word ecoism to link the dismissal of the ecological to the other kinds of isms and types of oppression, and I find that useful theoretically and practically, to think about how certain people and certain environmental spaces are always dismissed. And so the same types of conceptual strategies are used to dismiss them, and also similar types of strategies activist strategies can be used to try to end that dismissal, stop the denial, stop the to make these interests into push forward the interests of the ecological. Okay, and then fourth, dependent on a redirection of the political economy of design. And so I've used Kate Raworth's donut economics as the diagram for this point in her groundbreaking donut economics and bestseller in economics. And this, see, again, she has the three circles, the economy, earth circle that I've had earlier. So with a more detailed version of her donut model. And I just want to, this is so that's a more recent one. That was what, 2015? Oh, I think I'm not, or 2018. No, before that. Anyway, maybe 2017. And so this idea of like there being other economic models. This is something that I did with Angela Morelli in 2009, based on Herman Daly's work on a steady state economy. This is based on one of his papers, and where you're balancing the earth on one side and the needs of the humans on the other, and working down towards practical policies to make it happen. So it's going from the theoretical to the more practical policy measures at the bottom. And then, of course, the circular economy model, which has many similar versions of this. This is the RSA one from the Great Recovery. So there's a lot of people are probably familiar with these, but are these other models out there for, I mean, and this one isn't necessarily, it's not really like being implemented in the way that is like working at this stage, but and one of the reasons is because of this the political economy, right? So I think that more engagement with these ideas will be a starting point, at least. And so Kate Raworth describes an economy that is distributive by design as one whose dynamics tend to disperse and circulate value as it is created, rather than concentrating it in ever fewer hands, which is basically the opposite of what we have now, which is where and which is our own economy, which is accelerating like the concentration of wealth. An economy that is regenerative by design is one that is one in which people have become full participants in the regeneration of life-giving cycles, so we thrive within planetary boundaries. This is our generational design challenge. So Kate Raworth is an economist, but she talks a lot about design in her book, Donut Economics. It starts and ends with like a discussion of drawing and how the generative value of drawing in helping people understand things in new ways. And I think that's really so exciting for designers, is the sort of recognition of the potential for us to contribute in this space by like reframing things with images, reframing, like creating new ways of thinking and potentially acting in this space. And so, and then the fifth point is developed with expanded, regenerative, and distributed design. And here is a framework by Terry Irwin and Cameron Tonkinwise and some of their associates on the transition design framework, which is an expanded vision of design as design tries to respond to even greater challenges. And so one of the ways that I've been describing design as a way of mediating social relations, and so it's working in here in between human subjectivity and the environment. And so here we have, like, if we think back to the earlier circle with the economy in the middle, and we think about what it has, how is it, what is the economy actually doing to human subjectivity, and how do designers participate in that space? Like, because what does the economy force us to value? So one of the theorists I find useful here is Felix Geraghty, and where he writes, and this is probably the most theoretical slide in the presentation. So wherever we turn, there's the same nagging paradox. On one hand, a continuous development of new techno-scientific means to potentially resolve dominant ecological issues and reinstate socially useful activities on the planet. And on the other, the inability of organized social forces and constituted subjective formations to take hold of these resources and make them work. In response to this dilemma, Geraghty calls for an political articulation that will consider the dynamics between the three ecologies for the production of human existence in new historical contexts, literally the reconstituting of the modalities of group beings through communicational interventions for the modification and reinventions of the way we live by the motor of subjectivity. And so this is but from his book, The Three Ecologies. And it seems to me that it's almost a call for the design community to respond, to create these new modifications and reinventions of the way we live through the motor of subjectivity. And this and designers are constantly doing this, but we're doing it for capitalist purposes. But what else can we? I think if we dive into the design theory and we think about what we do in the creation of new realities and the effect and identities and the social relations, then that gives us some scope to think about how we might work differently. And so this is another diagram from my book, just thinking a bit about the intersection between the ways we understand and our epistemological assumptions and what it is we do. I'm not going to be able to go into that so much. But the last section, I've been talking quite a long time. We're not going to have very much longer after. But maybe I'll do another session. Post-pandemic political economies. I highly recommend this journal. Has just been published, I think, last week. There's like 30 really interesting papers on what, like, the ways in which COVID has revealed the sort of dysfunctionality of our economic situation, and also created space to do some really unique things. So I haven't really been able to extract as much content, well, anything really, from this to present to you today. Sorry, but I highly recommend, especially the first section, the first few papers. And then I'm just going to flip through these rather than, like, I have some things I could talk about. I have something that I could talk about with this, but I'm not going to, because I want to have at least 5 minutes where I stop talking. But there's just a few key ideas. This idea of it being an anticipated pandemic didn't take us by surprise. We knew a pandemic would come. And what do post-COVID design economies look like? The idea that the current economy is anti-resilient. The current economy is also a virulent economy. The idea that there's potentially exploited spaces have developed more agile responses than the dominant economies, because of the sort of extractive logic that runs throughout the economy. This idea of COVID as catalyst, which is very much in that journal that I've just shown you. And so within this, the emergent knowledge, where can we create some non-extractive design economies? Okay, that's it. Sorry for talking for so long. I'd love to talk to you some more about it if in another session, if we've only got 5 minutes. But does anybody have any comments or questions?
I'm still just taking it all in.
So many comments and questions, but it's like with 5 minutes, it's like, well, I'm just gonna have to hold it and wait.
Can I just? Yeah, I think it would be really good if we could find a way to do another session to try and do a mapping thing based around stuff you've done about. That would be really good.
Well, I don't mind staying longer than, I'd like to stay longer than 5 minutes now. So if this thing doesn't cut me off in 5 minutes, I'll just stay around until people have to go for supper or something. So
I don't think it will cut you off.
I'll do another
just
session.
carry on running.
Okay. Oh, good.
Sorry.
The voice of Simon.
Sorry. I can see John has his hand up. I'm sorry, I don't see if anybody else has their hand up, but John definitely has his hand up. So.
Yes, thank you. That was, yeah, I am soaking all of that in. But there was one thing in that which made me think of the classic economics things of sticky wages and sticky prices. Like there's a big shock, and whereas in neoclassical stuff, well, wages should sort of, if there's a recession, wages should come down instantly if there's a recession, because then people will just take the price for the work they do, but it doesn't happen. And I've just noted down on 2 cards, just thinking about, okay, so is there such a thing as sticky work or sticky values specifically for designers, in that you should stop doing this because of the sort of the emergent climate emergencies, all of the stuff around, you should, but the stickiness is, but I should just do this one job, or should just stick with this thing, or just make this one product or whatever else. So even though the values underneath change and the news and information should create more of a change. And this, maybe it's for individual designers, for teams, for companies, and so on. There's a stickiness to it. And I just wonder if there's something interesting about taking that term, an idea, and applying it to this to say, well, have there been other examples where stickiness has been unstuck, lubricated, whatever the right term is? But you know what I mean? It's just sort of like, why hasn't it changed? But are there things that you can copy from other places which would be more likely to make change?
Sure. I mean, stickiness and institutional practices, memory, just people with a particular a sort of idea of what constitutes good design, reproducing it over and over again. And I mean, I'm not. I think that it's one of, like, you know, definitely it could be that could be a concept that we developed a whole sort of critique around, but there's so many concepts like that. I mean, there's a lot of practices and norms that are reproduced despite the fact that we know that it's not feasible for us to continue to do these types of things forever.
The issue that you raised, and it was asked of me in my presentation, it was asked of Frederick, and it's something it keeps coming up, which is if you're in the design field in particular, and you're aware of these issues, and you're aware there's a problem, and you want to do things differently, how can you? Because there's this tension between if you're trying to earn money to pay your rent, and what people will pay for, and what you want to do, and that's I've heard this literally like almost every workshop about, like, well, how can we use this, and how we get paid to do it. And so my answer was, I went into academia because that's how I can get paid to do that research. But it's a valid, it's something that came up in here too. So I don't know if you have thoughts about that. Maybe it's another workshop about kind of scoping out where we have lots of ideas actually, and I think people are interested, and it's kind of finding out how we can match those together.
Yeah, I mean, it's why I went into academia as well. I was trying to make it happen in a design studio context, and I wasn't able to at that point. I do think that there's more happening now out there. There's more opportunities for people, but that's because we've created new institutions that are trying to push forward new values. So I do think it's about institution building at the moment, and education, and hopefully we'll get to somewhere that's more.
Well, so when we speak about education, institution building, I'm thinking about, the Montpellier Society within neoliberal capitalism, and that's something that is, if you haven't, the very short summary is the advancement and growth of neoliberal capitalism was not accidental. It was a concerted approach. People decided back in the 1930s that this is something that they wanted to advocate for, and it was a consistent growth of think tanks. That's where think tanks kind of originate, to legitimize and propagate different knowledge around what the mantra of neoliberal capitalism, awaiting an opportunity for to advance these ideas, which kind of came in the 70s. And so I'm not the first, like lots of people are talking like, how do we create an alternative kind of Montpellier society around these alternative ideas? Because it's lots of institution building, it's lots of different people coordinating. Maybe it starts with this conference. And it is unfortunately kind of multi-generational, longer arc, right? It's kind of, you keep on pushing it and hope, waiting for the opportunity for when those ideas become useful. So it makes me think like, how would that look, right? If we're talking about design and economics in particular, what does the design aspect, of this kind of concerted approach look like? That's what I think about.
May I jump into the discussion, because I want to add an extra layer to this. So once we typically relate to design and something else, we think that that's something else is designable in some way. That's how we approach new objects and new topics. So if we are approaching somehow economics, is this something designable, or is political economy designable? And if that's so, how is it different from planning, for example, economic planning, which is something that requires a lot of thought and a lot of careful considerations of the productive forces, how to organize and balance that with consumption forces and distribution channels and so on. And again, we have to remind that we have tried economic planning and consider as a society, modern society, that it doesn't work. That's why we shut down this huge Soviet Union experiment, and then we declare that we cannot plan economy, so we should let it emerge somehow and be free. And then the neoliberalism started to become the single narrative about how economy could go forward and in our society. But then, what does design adds to this situation? How can we see economy in a different way that is designable, or not? That's not the way how we can approach this relationship between those two different fields.
I can see Elise has her hand up as well. Sorry, just yeah. Is that a response to this? Or?
Oh, I don't know. Does Joanna want to respond?
No, go ahead.
No? Okay. I'm just wondering if, I mean, I'm surrounded by designers and I hear designers talking about this sort of inability to create the change that they want. And it's hard when you're a freelance designer or you have your own studio and maybe you don't have the power that you want to change your clients' minds. And I wonder, are many professions feeling this frustration? Is design in a particularly weak spot because it's a service provider? Are other professions stronger because they're unionized? I don't know.
Well, I think that certainly, like, there's that, as far my understanding, and is that lots of other professions, especially people like renewable energy and engineers, for example, they're probably, if anything, they're even more frustrated than designers, because we have actually absolutely got the capacity to do what we need to do, and yet we're not doing it because of economics, the political economy. You know, so in terms of, you know, we could have, things could be completely different in terms of how much fossil fuels we put, we're using, and how much greenhouse gases we're putting in the atmosphere.
I mean, I was not in design before starting my PhD. I was in broadly the field of kind of economic development and supply chain development, and we're all trapped in the same. I mean, we all are having to deliver against what people are willing to pay for, and we all can, you know, we're trying to tweak it in those various ways. So I don't think it's any different for people in other fields. We all have the same challenge. I guess because this is a design and economics field, it's also a conference also looking at the unique kind of position of designers, and I think there's something very design has this interaction with people very directly that isn't, I don't, you know, the work I was doing, you know, it's hard to know if the work you're doing has an impact on people. It can take a while. It can feel a little more abstract. And so maybe there's this more tangible aspect of you're directly engaging with people. And so there may be other fields like that. So I think we were just talking about, I was talking about design because that's the subject, but I think almost everyone, I certainly had the same challenges around that. And looking at impact measurement and supply chains was same problems.
Yeah, I mean, I hear designers saying on the one hand that they want to change so much, and then on the other hand, you hear designers saying, you know, we're only designers. We can't even change the minds of our clients. And I wonder, like, what's the power relationship that design needs to do these things?
Yeah, I mean, I really do worry about, on one hand, I'm trying to make some space for design in making change possible. But on the other hand, I really would not like to make it seem as if it's easy, especially within within most of our commercial interactions. It's very difficult. So that's why I think that there's like design activism, there's institution building, there's academic work, there's a lot of different it's not going to be a straightforward process. I don't think anybody, I wouldn't fault any designer for, a lot of us have to do things that we don't consider to be like the right thing in our work. I have to do a lot of non-sustainable things in my work. And because I live in, we all exist within capitalist frameworks. And the institutions that capitalism have built, which force us to do particular types to force us to prioritize things that are often unsustainable.
So there was things in your talk that were in that light made me think about, and to Elise's point as well, I think there's designers are there for the designing of a thing or a service, or the point at which a designer is hired is it sort of like something will now happen. So very seldom, if ever, is a designer hired to not do something, to undo something. It's like you're here to make something not happen. So maybe it's sort of like part of that. Also, I put together a terrible portmanteau I talked about 6 years ago, and I called it least modernism. How do you take the sort of like the idea of doing less or doing nothing and harness it with the same sort of excitement that modernism had, and get everyone get really excited that nothing has happened, or that the reverse of something has happened. So just this idea of least modernism, and goes like, that's what you become a least modernist designer. You go, I'm going to do nothing. Hire us to do nothing. Hire us to sit at home. Oh, sitting at home, or to unmake something, or to undo something.
There's lots of things you can do that don't have material impacts, though, like music.
Yeah. But if you make music for yourself or for a small local group, community, distribution of music is probably, especially on the current structure around streaming platforms, is a significant impact on
yeah. But if you we'll take the music example and go, all right, so what's the sort of like, how do you run the least modernist Glastonbury? And you're sort of like, you want people to gather, but you don't want them to travel to do so. You want it to sort of people to gather locally, and you don't want bands to have massive soundstage systems which are sort of like, which are burning lots of energy. So everyone listens locally. So you've all got headphones on at the same time. Just sort of like finding all of the things inside the thing, which you go, well, instead of doing that, let's do it this way. Instead of doing that, let's do it this way.
and
Sorry, Benjamin's got his hand up first, and I think then it's Andre.
Thank you. Yeah, on those things that were just said, I think there was a very famous German who did a critique of political economy. And in it, he describes as though what is the word in English? I apologize. The separation of labor, distribution of tasks, and how it's been accepted by capitalism to its advantage. And being myself a designer, I cannot stop but thinking that maybe designers should indeed think a little bit about not doing things sometimes, and maybe having a better understanding that design as a discipline is historically situated. It was specifically made for the industry. There's also some more maybe romantic craftsmen, a la Morris, for example, in there. But overall, design has a role, and its role was to produce, to spur consumption economy. And yeah, I really think that sometimes designers should probably think about not applying design to solve the problems that we all contributed to create. That is not, by the way, a call to inaction. We can be active in other ways, but maybe design is in some ways inherently toxic, I would say.
Okay, so I have the opposite take on that. I think designers should pursue positions of power in much larger degree and not let it be up to technocratic schools like economics, and to design for government, be inside of government. Also pursue larger positions, stop doing just cute projects like festivals, for example, or like, you can do that as well, it's fun, but might also have to deal with power, even though it's not as sexy, but it's really important.
Yes, well, in terms of, I mean, design is toxic. Often it is, because it's a practice that is very wedded to capitalism. So I agree with doing less of it, the toxic type of design, but also I'm a visual person who really loves and gets very excited about the ways that ideas can be communicated visually and help make me think in new ways and help share new ways of thinking about the world and new ways of doing something. So I do think there's also a lot of potential in that space to help transform the way that and make people excited about new ways of doing things and help them understand new ideas. So yes and no to both of, to the first question. And then in terms of, yes, we should be working in bigger ways, but also it will require more broadly trained designers. We need to have, if we want to be more like work in a bigger sort of as transition designers or work in more powerful places, we need much more. I mean, design can be a way of approaching knowledge, and some of the most exciting things that I've seen in design education is where design is being used in sort of multidisciplinary context as a way of sort of helping people who are trained in other disciplines use a few design strategies and ways of thinking and tools to like address the sort of complex problems in their own disciplines. So yeah, I think there's a lot of scope there, but only if designers are, if the education of designers is less narrow. That's why design economics is so great, and it's good to hear that you're doing that, Simon, with your students. It'd be interesting to know how many people have economics in their design education, because I'm not able to do very much of it with my students. In fact, I have been pushing very hard to try to, but
I guess like you could introduce them also to Rethinking Economics, which I'm founding in Finland. And it's like a really good resource for learning about all types of economic theories, especially like what Justin was talking about earlier about like Monty Pellerin Society and, you know, the think tanks that are getting funded everywhere and pumping out narratives. So to be that, that's a way of organizing for alternative narratives. And Kate Roberts is like, probably the one who's like most onto rethinking at the moment.
Simon?
I don't know. I had too many things to say then. I mean, I think just generally, what I realised is that you know, even doing little bits of economic stuff here and there with design students, you know, part of what's been lovely about just having opportunity to see some of these talks and look at some of this material together is just how much more scope there is to kind of push on that. I think the Rethinking Economics thing sounds really, really interesting, but trying to kind of, you know, tailor some of this and make it accessible to design students, I think is really, really powerful. And of course, the other way around in terms of, you know, what design can offer economists, which I think is you know, an ability to kind of explore the unknown a little bit more, a little bit to kind of live with ambiguity and not kind of have a way of realizing that you can't plan for everything, and then you've got to kind of you know, explore things through work. So there's just so much here. I don't know what to kind of say. I really think there should be another session for sure. You can do that to kind of push some of these things forward, because I feel like we just got started really. So
well, the good news on that is that me and Elise and another one from Creative Sustainability is doing that talk next week. So stay put.
Excellent. So are there any more questions or comments? And I mean, I'm definitely up for talking to Mark and Simon about doing another sort of more workshop-y session, and seeing if there's any sort of, you know, potential collaborations or projects that people might want to think about. But first, just sort of mapping out some ideas that might be useful to us for various purposes. So
Yeah, I think definitely we should talk about doing that.
yeah, we are basically thinking that this whole unconference would end kind of at some point towards the end of next Thursday. So trying to fit something else in, but also just like I mentioned to Joanna at the beginning of this call, finding a way for us to get together and do some collaborative sense making of everything that we've seen and heard and talked about during this unconference would maybe be that in itself. So it's just a thing to think about, and we can, like I said, catch up after this obviously and decide on some of those things.
okay, well, we've already gone like about 20 minutes over anyway. I'll see, it's nice to see some of you that I've just met this week. Thank you everyone for coming.